Hello my fellow dirt road travelers. This is part 2 of fixing our Jeep Gladiator. Come along with us. Alright guys, like I said, this is going to be part 2 of fixing our Jeep Gladiator. We just got the parts in we needed to finish it up, so we're going to go ahead and get started on that. I'm going to bring you guys along. Right now at this point you guys are saying, but Nate, we saw you wheeling the Gladiator. We've seen videos of the Gladiator out. And you're right, the Gladiator has been out, but I had to put the stock Driveline back in because we had some issues with the measurements on the drive shaft. So we had to send it back to Adams and get that corrected. So we're going to go ahead and get it back in, and I'll show you everything I did to put it back in temporarily and what I'm going to do now to put in the Adams drive shaft and get it ready to go. All right, here we go. All right, so like I said, let me start by showing you what we did to get it going. So I have this part right here. This is the pinion yoke for the rear differential. This is actually what I believe was the whole cause of our differential problems. You can see it took a few hits here, actually quite a few hits, and you can see the balancer is coming apart. So if I spin it around here, you can see the gap in the balancer change. So obviously that's not balancing anything anymore because it's not in balance. So I think that this is part of the problem with the pinion bearing going out. So what I had to do is I got another one of these from a drive shaft that one of my friends had removed from his JL, and I was able to use that with the stock drive shaft to get us going so we could make it to a few events and keep going until we got the drive shaft back from Adams. Alright, so I got the drive shaft right here from Adams. This is the back half. I'm going to go ahead and open it up and show you the way that they package these guys and ship them, and they take it serious. There's definitely not going to be any damage to your drive shaft when it comes shipped in the way they package it. So let me show you. First off, they put all these staples in, which really are pretty difficult to get out. I had to get a pair of pliers. Seemed to be the best way. So let me show you after I get that part open. Alright, so I got all the staples out. You can open it up. So I guess this box has a little bit of tape on it too. Take care of that. Alright, here we go. You can see the drive shaft's in here pretty good. It's got foam on both ends, foam in the middle. There's a box of hardware right there. So yeah, this drive shaft definitely not going to move around too much in here. They thought about that. The packaging is really good. So go ahead and get it measured up here and make sure we're correct now, and then get this thing installed. Alright guys, so I have both halves of the drive shaft laid out here on the ground. And just in case you guys have to order a drive shaft or you want to know how to measure it, I'm going to go over that with you real quick. So first things first, to measure the front half, we just go from the flat of the flange to the center of the center support. So you can see this is at 25 inches, right to the middle of the center support bearing. And that's where you want to measure. So when you're measuring the back half, we're going to measure off the center of the center support all the way to where the yoke cap is. So it's going to be about halfway on the bearing. So holding the camera, it's kind of hard to do that, but let me grab right here, and then we'll go right there. All right, and if you can see, I'm at 40, and that's exactly where I need to be for the length of the other half. On the back half of the drive shaft, this has a yoke on it, a slip joint on it, so that when your suspension is traveling, the drive shaft can slide in and out. So if you can see there, you can see it changes to blue. You don't want to be all the way out here extended where the blue is showing, because then your drive shaft, you don't have enough of the shaft inside. So you want to make sure that you stay on this section with what's visible while you're in the suspension travel. So you should be in that range right there, and that'll tell you if you have the right length. And so that's how you measure it. Also, when you're messing with any kind of drive line, you can see how all these sections that come apart are marked with paint. And you see that I have them all lined up because I need them all to be in balance. So this whole shaft is balanced as one piece, one unit. So you have to make sure you line up whatever marks. Obviously, this is just like a paint marker. So after this is on the vehicle for a while, there's a good chance I'm going to lose some of these markings. And then it will be up to me, if I ever take it apart, to make sure I put new marks before removing it so that everything lines up correctly. So for you guys doing a drive shaft, if you're taking out, especially on a multi-piece drive shaft like this, make sure you mark it before you remove it, so that way when you put it back together, your balance is correct. So that's just a tip for you guys. If you get it wrong, you will know it. The drive line will vibrate, and so you got to make sure you do that correctly. Alright, so we'll get to installing. Alright, I just want to give you a quick reminder here. Since I'm going to be working underneath the Gladiator on the drive shaft, I just want to remind you guys, when you're working underneath, make sure you chalk your tires. You can see I just put a couple bricks there, keep it from rolling away. This is especially important when you're doing a drive shaft, because when you're in park, that's in the transmission. So as soon as you disconnect that drive shaft, there's nothing holding the vehicle from rolling away. So if you have a sloped driveway and you forget to chalk the tires, as soon as you pull that drive shaft, that thing's going for a ride. And if you're underneath there, that's gonna be scary. So, and potentially get run over by your own car in your driveway. So make sure you chalk the tires. Alright, as you guys can see, the top two I can't quite get the impact on. So I'm going to go ahead and get a ratchet and get those out, and then we'll get this pulled off. Alright guys, I don't know if you could see me struggling for a minute there, but I forgot one of the bolts. I didn't get it all the way out. Had a couple of threads left on the front half of the drive shaft, so I had to pull it out. I apologize for the lighting. It's getting dark out here. It was hot today and I waited a little bit too long to get out here and work. But yeah, so we're gonna get it done in the dark. Hopefully you guys can see me, and hopefully it doesn't look too bad on video. But if you guys like these kind of videos and you think I need a nice light, a nice lit shop to work in at night so I can get this kind of stuff done, go ahead and comment down below and let Fawn know that instead of buying a Suzuki Samurai, maybe we should build a shop for Nate. What do you guys think? Sounds good to me. Alright, here we go. Alright, so I got the two drive shafts side by side here. Obviously you guys can see some differences right away. The factory drive shafts use these CV type joints, and then the aftermarket Adams is we're using a regular U-joint style. The nice thing about the U-joints is that if you have a problem with the U-joint, you can get U-joints at any auto parts store anywhere in the country, wherever you're at. If you have a U-joint going bad, you can just get them and swap them out. So that's a big improvement from these. I mean, these factory stuff, you're going to a dealer and you're gonna have to find it there. I think there's a couple aftermarket companies that do make upgrades for these. I think Terraflex did one. I did one on my JK. But yeah, just it's a lot easier with U-joints to find better quality U-joints. Alright, and then you see here the axle size of the tube of the drive shaft is so small compared to the Adams. And the weight of this whole unit, it's the Adams one is a lot beefier. You can just tell it's just a lot more solid. It's going to put up with a lot more stuff. Way simpler design on the center support bearing than the one from the factory. And having this double cardan joint in here, so You have two U-joints back to back, so this gives you a lot of angle without putting any extra pressure on the drive shaft. So that's good to relieve a lot of pressure with the angle for having a longer lift and more movement of the drive shaft back and forth. And this then again has just a CV type joint here. And then as we get to the back of the drive shaft, which is the part where you're going to have interference with rocks and such, as you can see from our drive shaft, it has a lot of marks from hitting rocks on Rubicon Trail and various other trails. But you can see the Adams one is actually narrower back here, and then has the slip joint back here, which actually makes it narrower yet when you get close to the differential. So instead of having this big old thing right there where all the rocks are going to be, you have a lot smaller Driveline back there, and that's going to give you a little more clearance for the rocks and hopefully not bang it up as much. And then also switching to a U-joint in the back instead of the joint that the factory one comes with, the CV type. So there's some big differences, and the Adams is definitely a huge improvement over this stock Driveline. So we'll go ahead and get it in. Alright, I'll point out one more thing I ran into here when I was taking off the factory drive shaft. I don't know if I pointed this out in the first video, but AEV put in these spacers for the center support bearing to drop it down lower. Because AEV put a 2.5 inch lift on our Gladiator, they wanted to bring the center support down a little bit to reduce the angle on the Driveline. So I know Rock Jock makes one that's really nice, aluminum block. Grandpa Steve has one on his Gladiator. But if you guys are doing a lift on your Gladiator, or I think even like your JL or anything like that, this might be a good idea. I'm not sure if a JL has center support, come to think of it. I don't know if it has a two-piece Driveline. I think it does. But yeah, just in case, it's a good idea to space it down to reduce that angle on all your joints. The Adams one actually has a different bracket, and that will space it down. I'll show you when we go back together. Alright guys, so now that we got the drive shaft out of the way, we got to go ahead and change out the yoke on the differential, and then also the yoke on the transfer case. So we'll go ahead and get these bolts out, or the nuts off. Alright, got that out of the way. And then, especially this back one, the pinion yoke, it's going to be pretty tight, so you're probably going to need some kind of puller to get it off of here. You don't want to do a lot of beating on it with the hammer, because there is a crush sleeve on the pinion shaft to set the bearing preload for the pinion bearing. So if you start beating on that, you're going to change that crush sleeve, and you can cause yourself some problems. Also, when you go to tighten it back down, you want to tighten it until you don't have any play left back and forth, front to rear. And that way you don't over tighten it to where you damage that crush sleeve and tighten up that pinion bearing, the preload, because you don't want to mess with that. Otherwise you'll be doing what I did and changing the pinion bearing all over again. So I'm definitely going to try to avoid doing that and not over tightening it. Alright, let me get the front one off here. Over here to the front one. Alright, we almost didn't have the beans to undo that one with this smaller impact I'm using, so, but we got it off there. We'll go ahead and pull the yokes, and then I'll show you the difference, and we'll get those swapped out. Alright guys, so I used a couple bolts from the original drive shaft, and I got this puller on here. So we'll go ahead and crank this thing down, get this yoke pulled off the transfer case, and then we'll do the same thing on the pinion yoke for the rear diff. Alright, it feels like it loosened up. There we go. Yoke's off. Let's get the one off the pinion for the rear diff, and we'll get the new yokes put on. Alright, whenever you guys are using any kind of puller like this where you have to thread it in, make sure that you get as many threads as you can into the object that you're pulling, so you don't just pull the threads out and you actually, get the yoke pulled off instead of stripping the threads. Obviously, I'm not planning on reusing this yoke, but like I did say, I borrowed this from a friend, so I want to give it back in good condition because I did damage my yoke already. So you can see, I don't know if you guys can tell, but while I'm turning on the differential here to turning on the puller to pull the yoke off, it's actually trying to turn the pinion bearing, and the Jeep is rocking back and forth a little bit while I'm turning on this. So luckily we have those wheel chocks on there, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to pull hard enough to get this thing to roll over that block I put there, so we should be just fine. But there's another reason for wheel chocks. Alright, feels like it's starting to come loose. Oh, we're losing a little bit of gear oil here. We're going to have to top that off. Let me go grab a container and get this pulled off and clean up this gear oil. Alright, let's get these swapped out. Alright guys, so here we got the old flanges that I took off. Here's the old pinion flange, the one I said I borrowed. You can see when they took this one off the last time, they used a hammer to beat on it pretty good. I did tell you guys that's probably not the best idea, but I guess that's how they got it off when they did it. Luckily I was able to borrow this and it worked fine to get me through until I could get the new stuff on. Here's my new pinion flange. As you can see, it's definitely a little shorter, and there's a lot less stuff going on. No balancer, none of that stuff to get hung up on. This dust cover I did pull off of my pinion flange. They don't come with it, but I thought it was a good idea to be able to just cover that seal up. So I'm going to go ahead and run the dust cover. Everything looks like it should fit just fine. It does have the lip for the dust cover to fit on there, so I was able to take the dust cover off the OEM one and put it on here, and I think it's going to help me out a lot just to keep things from hitting that seal or getting caught in there. On the front one, I did try to remove the dust cover, but this one was really stuck on there and I couldn't get it. And this flange doesn't seem to have a good lip for the dust cover anyway, so because this flange is bigger, it's going to protect it a lot more, so I'm not worried about running the dust cover on the transfer case side. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that off. On the transfer case side, as you can see, this is just a flat plate that actually has a machined ring lip on it, so the drive shaft fits on this machined lip, and that way it stays nice and centered and flat, and then you just have to tighten the bolts and torque them properly with a little bit of Loctite to keep that drive shaft from loosening up. But does pretty much the same job with a lot less bolts. Obviously the factory one, has 8 bolts in it, and the new one only has 4, so definitely a big difference there. These are a lot thicker bolts than what the factory one has, and like I said, it does have this machined lip, so the driveline sits on there perfectly center. When you're doing with anything driveline related or anything with a machine finish like this, make sure you have this as clean as possible, because you have a little speck of sand or anything under there, and then it's going to throw off your driveline angle and possibly let the bolts loosen up because it had something underneath it. So just make sure you clean that off before you tighten that up. We'll go ahead and get these installed, and then we'll get the new drive shaft put in. Alright, we'll go ahead and get this reinstalled here, this pinion yoke. This is a lock nut And this was a new one from changing the pinion bearing, but because I've had to take it on and off a couple times, I am going to throw a little bit of Loctite on there because I don't want this thing backing out. And once the drive shaft's on there, you can't really see it or check it. So I got a little bit of red Loctite here. This is the gel. I really like using this gel just because it doesn't get all over the place. I mean, and you just kind of twist this and you get a little bit out of the end. I think I'm probably almost out, but there's enough there to throw a little bit of Loctite in here. Alright, just get a little bit of Loctite in there and we'll reinstall this thing. Alright. Another thing here is you want to make sure you put a little oil on the seal, especially if you're using brand new seals and stuff. Luckily this thing is leaking oil all over the place right now because the diff is full, but throw a little oil on the seal, a little oil around the edge of the yoke, and that way when you go back together it'll slide in there and you won't cut the seal and cause any damage. Before you just hammer down on it, make sure that you have your nut on straight and you have plenty of threads there because you don't want it to pull off when you start tightening it down. Alright, now I was talking about before, see we have play in here. We want to just tighten it until the play, the in and out play is all gone because we don't want to crush that crush sleeve anymore. Alright, so that's pretty good. We got no play in and out. Of course you're always going to have a little bit of play side to side, but it's the in and out play that we're looking for. We just want to make sure that we have that preload correct on the bearing. And in a perfect world you'd want to measure the preload on the bearing just to make sure everything's good. I know my friend that helped me set up the rear end, Dirk, I'm sure he's gonna cringe when he sees this video and sees me not measuring the preload, but because I just tightened it down, we should be okay. And if we're not, then I guess I'll be doing another bearing, but hopefully everything will be good, and I'm pretty sure it will. So we'll go ahead and install the front yoke now. Alright guys, so we're basically gonna repeat the same process here on the front one. I put a little Loctite in the nut, put a little oil on the flange. Go ahead and put the flange in here. Alright, just one last check for play. Everything's good. Seems to be nice and tight. We'll go ahead and put the driveline in now. Alright guys, so while I'm under here about to install the front half of the driveline, I did realize I have a little bit of an issue that I'm running into, and I saw this issue and I was gonna get some new bolts to fix it, and then I forgot about it after I set the drive lines off to get the length changed. So I'm definitely gonna have to fix it now, but I'll show you what I'm running into and then show you what I'm gonna do for right now just to get by until I can get the bolts. Well, not get by, I'm not gonna be able to drive it until I get the replacement bolts, but let me show you what's going on here. Alright, so I mentioned that AEV had the stacked plates for the spacer for the carrier bearing, and with the Adams drive shaft I have this spacer that they built, which is really cool. It's got a nice gusset in it. It's definitely a lot bigger spacer than the 3 stacked plates I had from AEV. But the problem is, because AEV put the plate on here, let's see if I can get to them over here. Yeah. Because of the stacked plates that AEV used, they have longer bolts to go through all 3 plates. Problem is now all I have to do is go through this top bracket up into the cross member to mount it. So I need a much shorter bolt than what I have. I'm going to go ahead and install it with the longer bolts. It's going to be loose right now, so like I said, I'm not going to be able to drive the vehicle, but it's going to allow me to get the driveline all in and hanging tonight, and then I will go get some new bolts and put this the rest of the way together. Take these long ones out, put the new ones in. If I do them one at a time, it should make it a lot easier. I won't have to hold up the whole driveline. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. The other thing Adams did, I don't know if it'll come out on camera with the light, but they wrote on each side of this thing to tell you where they go, what they point towards. So this right here says this side to the diff. So I know that this side goes to the cross member, so that's up, and this side to the diff, so that's towards the back. So it has to go in this way. So the carrier bearing bracket also has a direction on it. It has an arrow and it says front. So I know that this way it goes in this way. And grab the driveline here. Alright. Let's make sure we get the arrow the right way. Throw this on the carrier bearing. Grab a couple bolts for the front here. This is kind of the tough part, because especially laying on your back, trying to hold all this stuff up and get all the bolts in. So you guys can feel free to laugh at me right now while I put this in. You do have to Loctite these bolts for the front, and I probably would also do a little bit of Loctite on the ones for the carrier bearing, but just get it up there and start a couple bolts first. And then as you put more bolts in, you can Loctite those and then take the other ones out and re-Loctite them before you tighten them. So that way you're not fighting with having to Loctite and have Loctite all over the bolts while you're trying to hold it up there. Especially while you're doing it by yourself on the ground here. Alright, now we got the carrier bearing hanging, so it's probably not going to fall on us here. And remember I did mention about the machine surface on this front yoke that allows it to center the drive shaft a little better and gives it the lip to fit on. So that's kind of hanging up on us a little bit right now. It's not completely sliding in there, so I'm gonna give it a little wiggle here and get it to slide in. Definitely want to make sure you have it all centered and on there before you start tightening the bolts. And the other thing I'm going to do is make sure that my marks are down where I can see them. So that way, when I do tighten this up, I can line up the other side with the back half of the driveline. So now that I have all the bolts in to where the driveline is not going to fall out, I'm going to go ahead and start putting in the rear half of the drive shaft. Alright guys, so now I got the front half hanging, so we can go ahead and install the rear here. Again, make sure you line up the marks for the balance. Grab the other bolts. These are also going to need Loctite, all these bolts, so we'll get that again, like I said, after we're done. We'll put in one at a time to hold it, and then we'll come back and change it. These get lock washers as well. Adams provides all the hardware for this. And normally the hardware I have that is wrong for the center support bearing, normally you would get the correct, you would have the correct hardware if you didn't have a spacer like I have. You would have, the bolts would be the correct length if you had factory bolts. So Just keep that in mind too. As you guys start changing things on your rigs, then when you go to do other things, that can cause you problems. Because not every aftermarket thing works together. And they all do things different ways. So the more you change, the more problems you can run into while you're trying to do other things. Alright, this is kind of what I thought was going to happen. Run into a little bit of an issue here. Let me bring you guys over here so you can see maybe. Alright, sorry about the bumpy ride. Alright, so if you can tell, my U-joints aren't lining up. And that's because I can't turn that because the wheels are on the ground. I'm not jacked up. And so I'm going to have to jack up the rear end. Then I can turn that pinion and I can line up the U-joints so that way I can get this bolted on. Alright, I don't know how much you guys picked up of what I was telling you just a minute ago, because the camera died. That was my fault. I had the camera battery die, and so I couldn't see it where I was working, and it just beeped and shut off on me. So what I'm doing now is I'm trying to line up the back, but I was a little bit off and I wasn't able to line it up, so I had to jack the back of the Jeep up so I could line it up here, and now I could slide the shaft in and line up the U-joints. Alright. Okay, and these U-joints have a little bit of tape on them holding them together from Adams, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that off now that they're where they need to be and I don't have to worry about the caps falling off. Okay, and then this one uses some U-bolts, so we'll go ahead and put those in. You got to make sure your U-joint caps are all the way on too, so that way it'll fit into the yoke properly. Right, and then these nuts have a lock washer with them as well. I will be putting Loctite on these as well when I go to do the final assembly here in just a minute. Just nice to get everything up and hanging, and that way you can verify all your fitment and everything, and then go ahead and put the Loctite on everything, because you don't want to be taking stuff back apart that you already put Loctite on. You want to kind of avoid that. Make sure the Loctite is going on a finished product. Alright, so as you guys can see, I have the Adams drive shaft hanging up in there now. Everything looks good. Length is correct. Obviously I still have to get those bolts and tighten everything back down. Alright guys, so I got the drive shaft all in. I still need to tighten all the bolts and add the Loctite, but I think I'm going to go ahead and cut you guys off right here, because I don't think I need to drag you guys through putting Loctite on more bolts and tightening more bolts. So I think you guys kind of get the idea. I am going to get the bolts tomorrow morning to replace those carrier bolts that are too long, and then we'll be good to go. I'll show you guys the finished product in the morning when there's some daylight and you can see a little better. But here's a little sneak peek. Super happy with the way everything lines up, and excited to get it together and on the road tomorrow. Alright guys, it's the next morning. I'm back here underneath the rig. I got some shorter bolts to hold the carrier bearing, so I'm going to go ahead and get everything bolted in now. Also picked up some blue thread locker, some Loctite, so I'm going to use that on the carrier bearing bolts, and then I'm going to use the red on anything that is actually attaching the driveline together. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything Loctited and get everything bolted up. Alright, drive shaft's all installed, all the bolts are tightened and Loctite, ready to go. Just one last thing to do, and that is to put a little grease in the Zerk fitting right here. That's going to put grease inside the drive shaft, so when it slides in and out, it has a little bit of lubrication in there. Some U-joints have grease fittings. These U-joints do not on the Adams drive shaft. These are sealed. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes you want to look in here, and they'll be at an angle in here, and see if there's a grease fitting in there, and if so, then lube up your drive shaft that way too. So we'll get that done, and then the last thing we'll have to do is, since we spilled so much gear oil here out of the pinion, we're definitely going to have to drain and, well, we'll have to refill the gear oil, but I'm going to drain and refill because of all the work I did in there, so I have some clean oil in there. It's been a couple 100 miles on it now, so we'll clean it all up, get new oil. All right, here we go. All right, guys, I just pulled up to the house from the test drive. Everything seems to be going good. So if you guys like this video, please go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. We're really trying to get to that 1,000 so we can get monetized and bring you guys more cool stuff on these videos. So that would really help us out if you guys could do that. And you guys know the drill. I'm tired, hungry, and dirty. And that's going to be the end of this dirt road journey. Bye, guys.